Well, it's 10:05. He has the Zoom up, so. Oh, that's it.
Kitchen.
Oh wow, this is really rough. Go ahead. Okay, we're going to get started, folks. Hi, I'm Mia Sachs. I'm the council president. It's really exciting to see all of you out here on a Saturday morning to discuss land use and planning. And we thank you so much for taking time out of your weekend and your Saturday morning to talk about this critical site. I wanted, since redevelopment is the purview of the council, it's a slightly different zoning process. I just wanted to speak on behalf of the council and let you all know a little bit about where we are right now in our thinking and how we're approaching this task. The current council, I think there was only one member who was around for Seminary site round one. So the rest of us had a little catching up to do, and we've been spending time trying to understand what happened in the first time. I will say that one thing that became clear is that there were a lot of expectations, and the expectations that were raised were beyond what could be accommodated on the site. And so we are committed to keeping us all to a realistic framework of what can be expected. We are also aware of the tremendous toll that it has taken on the immediate neighbors to live with uncertainty. I think we're going on 6 years now, and we do understand that this has been very stressful to be living adjacent to a site in which you feel that you don't know what's going to happen and you're not sure what control you have over what will happen. And so we are going to try this time around to be very clear about what everyone's roles and responsibilities and rights are and what the time frame is. And the council and the governing body are committed to bringing, after 6 years, a redevelopment plan on this site by the end of this year. Just by way of a little bit of background context, the neighbors and the contract purchaser have been urging us to jump in and move forward on this site. We have had our hands full with meeting the compliance requirements of our affordable housing settlement, which was no small order. We are almost down to the final stretch on that, and so we are now able to take this on, and it is a top priority for us now for the rest of the year. And we do want to, it's not all in our hands. After it comes to council, it goes to the planning board for a full site plan process and all that would normally happen before the planning board. But we are committed to acquitting ourselves of the responsibilities that belong to the council by the end of the year. So let's see, what has been happening during this time when we have not been able to deal with it directly is we had tasked the contract purchasers and the contract purchaser, singular, and the neighbors to meet with one another, get to know one another, talk about their interests, needs, wants, desires for the site, and to come up with what would hopefully be a common vision. I will say that I think a lot of progress has been made. There are certain key aspects which not only the neighbors and the contract purchaser can agree on, but the municipality can as well. And those involve maximizing green spaces, minimizing traffic circulation, sensitivity to the historic, iconic status of the neighborhood, ensuring that whatever is built on the site reflects that rich history of the immediate neighborhood. Other priorities are restoring the site as a key gateway to Princeton. Right now, it's basically just an aborted construction site with a fence around it. And I think we can all agree that as one of Princeton's premier gateways, this is not a situation that we want to continue indefinitely. Stormwater, which a number of you discussed at the previous meeting, is a top priority. There will be some discussion today about stormwater, and I just want to reassure you that what is available to the municipality in terms of technology, stormwater mitigation technology that is cutting edge, state regulations to impose very severe stormwater mitigation standards have been updated in the past few years in New Jersey, and New Jersey has now become one of the strictest states in the country. And Princeton, in a redevelopment area, and it's one of the benefits of redevelopment, has the ability to impose stormwater standards that exceed state standards. So our planners will talk a bit more about that, but stormwater came up a lot, and as someone whose basement regularly floods, I just want to let you know that dealing with the stormwater impact is a top priority for us, but we really do feel that we have the legal means to implement the standards that are necessary and the technological expertise to ensure that that is a successful implementation. So in terms of, I was going to say that the contract purchaser and the neighbors have met and they agree on all of these good things. Where there does seem to be a possible parting of the ways is with the D word. And by that I mean density. So I would say that one of the issues with density is that there is a connection between density is basically the engine that fuels all of those good things that we want to see on the site, like quality architecture, top-notch design, cutting-edge stormwater mitigation. And so I understand that, there has been some discussion in the neighborhood, and we've heard about focusing on the zoning that exists on the site. I want to say that the zoning that exists on the site was actually the buildings that exist on the site predate the zoning. Princeton's zoning code was enacted after those buildings existed and reflects basically what those buildings are. While we want to respect the historic character of the neighborhood, I would say as a council, we are more focused on the next 100 years of Princeton as opposed to using what was the situation in Princeton a century ago as our guideline. I think there was a lot happening in Princeton 100 years ago that we're not proud of, that we don't want to replicate, and we are, as a council, committed to planning for what makes sense for the future of Princeton. So our task is how to incorporate the history of the site while adapting that to Princeton Princeton's future, which is really our responsibility as council members in 2023. We have asked our planners and attorneys to give us some framework in which to move forward with these decisions. I think there are, from a planning perspective, there are certainly two national, international crises, but particularly national crises, and in particular in the Northeast. Climate change and the housing crisis are two realities that we, in particular as Democrats, cannot ignore. And if you look at housing policy that's being put out by the governor, the Biden administration, the focus is very much on housing, the housing crisis and the climate crisis. It would be irresponsible of us as elected officials in 2023 to ignore those two crises. Part of responsible development on the site is taking into account those realities. So we will hear a bit from our planner about what that means. The other change in circumstance since the Seminary round 1 is, and our attorney, Steve Lennox, will be discussing some changes in the legal framework. As you all know, Princeton, yes, and New Jersey have compliance requirements under the Mount Laurel Affordable Housing Framework. There are a number of recent court cases which have rather stark implications for the reality that Princeton, at the point of consolidation, maintained, and the borough still maintained, and it had a vacant land adjustment. Sorry, this is complicated stuff. And I'm not an attorney, but I have come to understand it the hard way. Because if you don't understand it, you're in trouble. So the unmet need of the borough at the time of our settlement was 195 units. I think, and Kevin Van Heist, who is our affordable housing attorney, is trying to figure out how much progress we've made, but it might be 185 or 180, but that still leaves a big gap. The seminary site reflects a changed circumstance, which falls into that framework. And there was a recent case which really was a game changer in terms of how affordable housing the affordable housing mandate plays out in the state. And Steve Lennox will discuss that as well and explain what that is. So what are the next steps? The next steps are for the municipality and the town to begin meeting on a regular basis with the contract purchaser to understand what he has in mind. I know that he's done a great deal of research on the site, and so we want to hear from him, his perspective, what he thinks is a viable plan. And then we, as a council, have the rather unenviable task of trying to find a compromise between the neighborhood, who from what I understand, would like to minimize the density, but would also like all sorts of community benefits and amenities from the contract purchaser, which those things are paid for with density. So I can assure you the benefit of redevelopment is that it enables the town to look at all of what would ultimately be the redeveloper, all of their financial analysis, their projections, and to verify whether or not they are credible. And at some point, we are going to have to find a middle ground between all the things we want for the neighborhood and how they're going to be paid for. And that's what we're going to be working on over the summer. Wish us luck. And I can't put an exact time frame on when the next meeting will be because we have our work cut out for us now. This is now top priority, and we are going to be, delving into it. I just want to say that we have assembled a team of advisors for the town that represent the top level expertise from around the state. Top attorneys in redevelopment, planners, financial advisors, and they will be guiding us in this process. And we, I think, would look to come back towards the end of the summer with the findings of our discussions over the summer. And then we would look to implement a redevelopment, to bring a redevelopment plan to council by the end of the year. I just want to say that as committed as we are to the site, you can only imagine that we have many things to accomplish on council, and there has to be a limit to how much time and taxpayer money and staff time and legal time and elected official time can be spent on any one site, and that's just the reality. We have to be fair to everyone in Princeton. I just want to say one more thing, which is that Princeton's third round affordable housing settlement was signed in 2019. It was the week before I got on council. And the bulk of it, 3/4 of it, I would say, is located in a few small blocks in one of Princeton's few remaining middle-class neighborhoods. We are aware of the optics of that neighborhood has disproportionately borne 25 years of Princeton's obligation. I recently heard a podcast by Ezra Klein in which he talked about how Democratic towns in particular are guilty of putting all of the housing in middle-class neighborhoods because those neighborhoods don't have the resources to hire expensive attorneys and to fight back. I understand why that decision was made. I think it brought enhanced vitality to a shopping center that was on its way out. But I just want everyone to understand that neighborhood really took it on the nose, and that is just something that we have to think about in the whole picture. So what we as a council can promise to you all is that we will listen to all of you. What we're asking of you is to not think about your backyard, just the next few years, but what do you want, what do we want to see collectively as a community for Princeton over the next century? And we all have to make some sacrifices, we have to compromise. I think that this site, I honestly believe that this site could meet the bulk of what everyone wants. But it will be much easier for all of us if we come into it with the spirit of looking for compromise and understanding some of the legal constraints and financial constraints that will inform the decisions. And as I said, back to my original comment, my understanding of what happened with the first failure of this round was that there were many expectations that were raised, very few of which could actually be satisfied, and so everyone went away. And I will say personally, I think it's a big loss for the town. It would have been a wonderful thing for Princeton to have young seminary families living next to where they can attend school in a walkable neighborhood. They represent a demographic, young families who are just getting started, that we want to see more of in Princeton. From a sustainability perspective, it meant that they wouldn't be driving back and forth. It is a tremendous disappointment, and it's a loss for Princeton that didn't happen. We have another opportunity to try to create something that will benefit the town, but the landscape of where we are legally on this site means that if we prolong, as happened the first time, I want to be candid with you. The municipality will lose the ability to negotiate for you the very benefits that you want. Because once we get to 2025 and the next round, if not sooner, anything extra that we could negotiate in terms of neighborhood amenities, stormwater, traffic calming, high-quality architecture, once we get into an affordable housing court process framework, all of those things are considered cost generative. So time is of essence. We all need to buckle down and focus on reality and not what we would like in theory in an ideal world. We don't live in an ideal world. So that is our request for compromise, thinking about the future, not what was the situation 100 years ago, and thinking about future generations. I wanted to add that 4 members of the governing body, a quorum, come from multi-generational families in Princeton. We are deeply steeped and immersed in Princeton's history and have a profound respect for it. We understand the importance of retaining that. We also have benefited from the investments in long-term planning that our parents and grandparents made, and we feel the responsibility to plan equally responsibly for the future of our children and grandchildren, who we hope can afford to come back and live in Princeton. Last thing I want to say is just on Friday, I attended the Regional Plan Association panel called Be My Neighbor. And one of the panelists remarked that all housing conversations are, in the end, ultimately about people. And I'd like us to keep that in mind today as we have this conversation. So thank you.
There's not much left to say, is there?
I know, that's it. Okay, so let's move to the roundtable part. What is going on here?
Well, Jim figures that out. There are plenty of seats still available. I see people standing in the back. If you want seats, there's plenty over here.
Oh, of course.
Anybody?
My computer is frozen. Look at this.
Can you use this or no?
Of course, now is the time we're going to have technical difficulties. My computer is completely locked up with the slideshow, so let me see if I can get this fixed. I'll tell you what, Steve, you want to handle intro, and I'm going to unplug this and try to
happy to
figure out
handle
what's
it.
going on here.
Today, just like last time, we have an agenda. Can't hear me? There we go. Just like last time, we have an agenda we're going to get through. The idea is to go through it, maybe about 20 to 30 minutes, and leave plenty of time for roundtable, because at its core, that's really what we're here for, is to hear and have a dialogue. We're going to go through what has transpired since the last time we met back in March. We'll do a summary of what the takeaways were from that first roundtable. We'll talk about what are the principles that are informing the priorities that the governing body has for this site, and why those are priorities and what that perspective is. And then we'll have a discussion both in the room and, as you can see, streaming on Zoom for anybody who wants to comment on this beautiful day on this Saturday morning. You're all here. And then we'll talk about next steps, much of which the council president just outlined. So in terms of what has transpired since the last meeting, we have continually assessed and synthesized the feedback that were received, both from that meeting and then, of course, through other communications since then. We have had discussions regarding balancing what those priorities are on a municipal front. So we've heard already from the council president, and you're going to hear a lot more this morning, about what those crises are and Princeton's role in addressing them for this particular site, and balancing the need for that greater community and municipal obligation with the neighborhood and the neighborhood character of the site. And then we want to continue public engagement. That's why we're here. As a reminder for those of you who are not here, when I gave an introduction in terms of what the redevelopment process is and where we are in that process, the next step legally is just for a redevelopment plan to be prepared and presented to council for adoption, in which they would introduce it by ordinance, send it to the planning board for consideration and any recommendations, and then send it back to the governing body for adoption. And after that is adopted, the municipality can negotiate with a prospective redeveloper for that site and enter into an agreement. We call it a redevelopment agreement, which governs the redevelopment of that site, sets forth the obligations for both parties, because redevelopment is a public-private partnership. And then from there, that redeveloper would then have to go through the ordinary zoning course of going to the planning board and obtaining site plan approval before they're eligible to get their building permits and start building. All of that is the legal framework. What we're doing here today is not a requirement under the law at all. It is a reflection of the commitment that the governing body has to incorporating and taking in as much feedback as it can get from perspectives as local as the next door neighbors and as widespread as the regional and community needs addressing the housing crisis, the climate crisis, stormwater, and everything else facing Princeton, and take that in and balance that out into a redevelopment plan that is responsible, reflective of these conversations, and also forward-thinking. And I think we heard that from the council president. So that's what we're here for today. Not a legal obligation, but one that is very important to the municipality to undertake. After we go through this presentation, it looks like the computer's getting back up, so we're almost there. We will next engage with the contract purchaser. It's very important that once we set the stage and what those priorities are, and now that we know what those priorities are, let's see what the concept that is being presented. We haven't had those discussions yet. And that comes from two different and distinct pathways. Obviously, from a planning perspective, we want to make sure that it works, but also from a financial perspective as well. Redevelopment is about levers. You pull one lever up and another one has to go down. So it's finding that middle ground, that balance that works both for the municipality and the neighborhood, but also one for the contract purchaser and the eventual redeveloper, because if it doesn't work, it doesn't get built. So that's what's happening next. And then, as the council president said, there will be another community session, TBD, when that would be, where that concept will ultimately be presented, and then a redevelopment plan will be introduced to the council. So that's where we are now, and it looks like we're almost ready to start
Yep, I'm trying.
the presentation. Yep.
Sorry, folks, I apologize. I don't, just, why did my computer choose this moment to do this? Hold on, it's just downloading.
It's a rule of technology.
It is.
The other rule of technology is the USB port is always backwards the first time you plug it in.
Tick, tick, here we go, almost there. Why is this not opening? I mean, Steve, it's not even,
I have the older presentation on it.
all right, we're just gonna have to go.
Do you have the updated version?
No. And I made changes this morning too, so I don't know what's going on.
Can you open it as a PDF?
I don't understand why this doesn't want to open. It's the PowerPoint that's not working. All right, we're gonna have to triage here and go with yours. I don't know what the problem is.
I don't know if this will work on the Mac.
It won't. Well, apparently my computer does not want to cooperate, so we're going to switch over to Steve's.
That work?
Yep. You want to give me your...
It's not a PowerPoint, but we'll get there.
So, really what we want to talk about just briefly are some of the considerations from the first community roundtable. So this is a summary of the issues, having re-listened to the recording of that meeting a couple times and kind of gathered all these points that folks made. You know, we had a good hour and 15 minutes or so of commentary from interested parties. And this is a summary of the issues that we heard. You know, as Council President Sachs covered, you know, we heard particularly the commentary about stormwater management, flooding, integrity of, you know, foundations, the historic considerations. Those were all things that we took away and heard from that first meeting. Go ahead. So as we look at the municipal perspective and really the municipal priorities and responsibilities, these are kind of the 4 key points that we see on the municipal side. So one very important one is to increase the supply of affordable housing within the community. We also want to promote high quality design, and that's in the context of the historic character of the neighborhood, as well as you know, the municipality in general. Embracing smart growth principles is also another important point. So as we look at, you know, we spent some time last time talking about the community vision survey and the ongoing master plan process. So that is not concluded. There's nothing concrete that's been adopted by the planning board at this point. But we do have 2 very important documents that have been adopted and really represent planning policy for the municipality. And that's the 2019 Climate Action Plan and the 2020 Sustainability element of the master plan. And really what those documents focus on is embracing those smart growth principles. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in detail. And then also responding to the climate crisis. As we heard in our opening remarks, you know, it's not just a local issue, it's a national issue, it's a world issue. And sustainability and fostering sustainability to work towards trying to solve that crisis is important, and it's part of this process. So on the municipal side, increasing the supply of affordable housing. So, you know, we as a community, as a state, as a nation, have a moral obligation to provide affordable housing opportunity. Now that is cemented in New Jersey court case by the Supreme Court dating back to 1975 initially, and that was the Mount Laurel decision. And what it says is that every municipality in the state of New Jersey has a constitutional obligation to provide opportunity for affordable housing. Now, Princeton was a bit of a unique situation with the merger because we had the township with one obligation that was defined and we had the borough with another. So during the course of that merger, there was an unmet need that existed. So there was an obligation calculated. There was only a certain percentage of that the borough could reasonably meet based on the land resources that were available. And then we have this component of our obligation called unmet need. And it's essentially what's deferred and cannot be met at the time, but doesn't go away. So as we look at that, again, that established in the settlement was 195 units. It's been whittled down slightly. You know, we might be around the 180 mark, but that unmet need still exists. And the importance of that, as was hinted to, was some recent case law, court decisions that kind of turned how we think about this on our head. You know, I've been working at affordable housing for 25 years, and this decision was something that was a little bit of a surprise to a lot of us. And what it said was essentially that if you have a situation of changed circumstances on a particular site, that it has implications for that unmet need. The historic thinking was once you had a settlement, even if you had unmet need, you had immunity and protection. And that new site surfacing didn't necessarily change that in any to any great degree. But this recent decision in Madison from Judge Hansberry said exactly the opposite. So where we have sites that come up that are changed circumstances that become available, they need to be considered and addressed in the context of realistic development potential and unmet need. So we'll talk about that a little bit on the legal side towards the end. Go ahead. So as we look at affordable housing in Princeton and we look at the distribution of where our affordable housing projects have been built in the past and where we've zoned for these opportunities using redevelopment as well as overlay zoning in context in conjunction with unmet need, what we see is a concentration in the former borough along Nassau Street, north of the former borough in the township. These are overlay districts, redevelopment areas that have been put in place for the settlement, and I'll say a distinct lack of those in the western section. So west of the former borough, we have a couple of projects in the southwest corner, but nothing of critical mass. So it's important, I think, from a policy perspective, that we seek to incorporate affordable housing throughout the community, not just concentrated in one area, but spread it out. And that's an important goal. And that helps meet sustainability and climate action goals by locating those projects near or in the downtown. Now, obviously, we're going to have a greater concentration in the downtown, but still providing opportunity where there's still reasonable access to that, walkability, transit, things of that nature. Go ahead. So what we did was we went and looked at a lot of the projects that we had in the third round settlement, projects that have been zoned. We have redevelopment plans. Some of these are under construction right now. And what we see is a pretty wide variety of density. Obviously, all these projects have different contexts. They're located in different places in Princeton. But there's a pretty wide spectrum of density. So we have as little as 20 units an acre and as many as 86. So if you look at the project at 195 Nassau Street, that's a 45-unit project with, I believe, 6 or 8 affordable units that is on a half an acre. So that project pencils out to about 86 units in acre density. So, and again, I'm not suggesting that's what we're focusing on for this particular site, but as we look at the variety of projects and their context, there's no single approach that we've taken. And there's an importance in providing affordable housing where jobs are located. So Princeton is an economic engine. Not only do we have, employment opportunities in the university, but if you think about our businesses in the downtown and the folks that work in those businesses, so wait staff at a restaurant, folks that work in a bookstore, those are all people that work in Princeton and likely can't afford to live here. So locating, really in accordance with smart growth principles, these types of projects and density where folks can work and live in town is an important aspect. Promoting high quality design is something that we've been keenly focused on. As we talked about at the last meeting, enhancing this gateway is something that's critical, and we'll get into a little more detail on that. Reducing or eliminating surface parking is also something that's important. If you look at this site as it was developed in the past, it was primarily surface parking that was visible to neighbors. We want to try to take the opportunity to get rid of surface parking, use it either under a structure or really limit surface parking, and we think that's a better design objective for this. Context-sensitive architecture, we've talked a lot, particularly at the first meeting, about the historic nature of this neighborhood, the historic homes that we have here, and trying to come up with something that is sympathetic to that. Publicly accessible green space is another big issue in high-quality design. There was a significant open space, green space at this site along Stockton Street that had a fence around it and wasn't widely utilized by the public, but the goal here is to fold that into this process so that we can have that publicly accessible space that people will use. Stormwater management, is always a big issue in Princeton. We think that this site has no stormwater control features on it presently, or didn't have them. So that's an important element, as this site largely drains down the hill, down Hibben, down Edge Hill, and down to Mercer Street. So we want to make sure that we're providing adequate attenuation and control for that. And then really, as we've talked about even today, the way to achieve this is by using density as an incentive to get that high quality design. So through the redevelopment process, we have the ability to require things that we can't require through normal zoning. And we talked at the last workshop about the projects that we've seen, so that list that was just up on the screen, those are all projects that were part of our affordable housing initiative. They're projects that we didn't have a measure of control that we can have here. And the hope is that we can get better results with design through the redevelopment process. So focusing on the gateway, so this street view shows the view down Stockton Street, looking east towards the former borough. And the Whiteley Gymnasium, was a structure that had a specific mass. It also had this element of this two-story wing, we'll call it, that stretched out towards Stockton Street. And you can see in the photo on the bottom how that gateway could be enhanced here, opening up that view that was formerly cut off and provide an opportunity to focus on elements of the site there, green space, high-quality architecture that's kind of a terminal vista there that really announces people's arrival into our downtown. Enhancing stormwater management. So treatment of this site under current stormwater regulations. So now that the buildings have been demolished, much of the impervious surface has been removed, this site will be treated differently under New Jersey's stormwater regulations. So whereas you can get credit for existing buildings and pavement and you don't necessarily have to address them in a stormwater plan, this will be treated differently now. So as essentially looking at it as a greenfield site, there will be these stringent requirements that the DEP has adopted, that Princeton has codified in its ordinance as well, that's going to give us a greater measure of control about how stormwater is handled on this site. We also have an ability to go further with that in the redevelopment process. So Princeton has, in my opinion, having dealt with it many times, one of the better stormwater ordinances in the state. It took those controls, made them more stringent than the state required, and it's really projects between 400 and 5,000 square feet of new impervious that are not regulated a little differently, we'll say less stringently than those that are 5,000 square feet and greater. So through the redevelopment process, and as we have these discussions in the future, we might come up with something even better than what we require now that's going to give people more comfort that we're not going to have the flooding issues that we've had associated with this site in the past. We also have some good site-specific data that the contract purchaser has provided. They've gone out, they've dug test pits, they've looked at the soils, and this site is somewhat of an anomaly in the context of the greater Princeton community. It doesn't have a lot of the conditions that prohibit infiltration. The groundwater on this site is very deep, which is contrary to what we see in a lot of places. So the data that even the basic data that we've heard from the contract purchaser to date is that this site is different than most of what we deal with. And the hope is that through that, we're not going to have a lot of the issues, and we will be able to, achieve infiltration, whereas there are many places in town that we can't, and we think it'll be a better outcome with that. So there was also a concern expressed about subsurface development. So if we had parking underneath buildings and how that displaces groundwater and how it might affect neighbors, that was a big concern, and there were people that spoke about specific instances of that happening to them. So I think what the site-specific data points to is that we don't think we'll have that issue here if we have all this parking underneath, if we have basement excavations. It's likely not going to be an issue as we go through site design. So embracing smart growth principles, again, this is something that's espoused in the Climate Action Plan. It's also something that's discussed in the sustainability element, and it's important. And we want to, again, as adopted planning policy for the municipality of Princeton, it very explicitly says in those documents we need to embrace these principles. And these are the smart growth principles that we reviewed at the last roundtable. These are from the US EPA and the Smart Growth Network, and these are, I'll say, widely accepted as the principles that we want to adhere to. Go ahead, Steve. So walkability and transit as it relates to this site in particular, it's about a 12-minute walk to Palmer Square from this site, and we have about a 16 or 17-minute walk over to the Dinky, and that provides a transit opportunity connection over to Princeton Junction and New Jersey Transit. We also have a New Jersey Transit bus line that runs on Stockton Street, stops right in front of this site, and then continues down Nassau Street to North Harrison and can get people from this site to other areas of the community on a bus, which is important. So that transit availability, the walkability of the site, those are kind of the basics of those smart growth principles. Go ahead. So this yellow circle that's here is a half-mile radius. So in the context of smart growth, it's widely accepted that a half-mile radius is a walkable radius. So you can see with the TRW site in the center of this circle, that half-mile radius does pick up a good portion of the downtown, particularly Palmer Square, and means that this site is considered walkable under those smart growth principles. So responding to the climate crisis, as Council President Sachs said, is an important initiative for Princeton. Again, this is adopted planning policy of Princeton, and it really focuses on, this slide in particular, which we did talk about at the last meeting. If we develop in a way that is sprawling, not compact, we're not going to meet a lot of these climate action goals that we have: reducing greenhouse gas emissions, increasing transit, increasing walkability, use of bikes. These are all things that we feel need to be incorporated into this process and be part of this redevelopment plan, because it helps, this site in particular, helps us meet a lot of those climate action goals. The sustainability element had, again, specific adopted policy related to land use and mobility. So these are the goals and objectives. And the primary one is to follow those smart growth principles. So make it possible for people of all income levels who work in Princeton to live in Princeton. Again, these are the people that work in our service industry, in our retail industry, in our downtown. And we want to give them the opportunity to live in the community in which they work, and that's important. Focus more density in town and near public transit, protect and preserve environmentally sensitive land, and build housing, including affordable housing, near public transit, and then creating multiple walkable, bikeable, mixed-use nodes. So these are all, again, adopted policy of Princeton that we think is very relevant to the consideration of this site. Good. So the context of the structures that existed on this site previously, I think, is an important perspective to look at. So the past conditions. So while this site is certainly part of the surrounding neighborhood, it certainly had a different context than the single-family neighborhoods on Edge Hill, Hibben, and Library, all the surrounding places. So for more than 100 years, there was institutional use here, and these buildings had a mass and scale associated with them. We had 3-story buildings, the Whiteley Gymnasium and the wings on that really consumed most of that portion of the site. We also want to look at, go ahead, Steve. We also want to look at the relationship of those buildings in the past to the surrounding neighbors. So some were very close, and if we look at the back of Tennant and Roberts, there was the playground in the back on the south side of the site that had a little greater separation to the neighbors in that portion. So the context of what was there previously and what we might end up with is important, because it's not, this site was not a single-family neighborhood. It didn't have single-family homes on it. It had something very different. So we think that context is important as we look forward to what will be developed in the future, and it helps inform that decision. You can go ahead and roll through. Keep going. So in particular, the green space along Stockton is an element that I as a planner feel needs to be replicated in any future development plan here, but also making that open space more publicly accessible. As people walk by the site, and I'm sure people that live west and south of here walk up Hibben Road and then walk down into town. So providing that element that can be utilized not just by the residents of this neighborhood, but make it an element that's accessible to the public. There could be events that happen there, farmers market, many public events that could happen there that could be exciting, not only for the residents that live here, but those in the neighborhood and those in the greater community. And again, focusing on the fact that the surface parking that existed here is probably an element we don't want to replicate in a redevelopment plan. But structured parking, particularly underneath buildings, is expensive. It costs money to do that. And really, density is the way that we can incentivize the developer to provide those elements that will result in better quality of design at this site in the future. So the community vision survey, again, the master plan process is not concluded. We don't know how these results are going to be folded into that. That work continues. But there were many we'll say things that surfaced that were very clear, and that we want to have a healthy, thriving downtown. We want to expand middle-income housing opportunities, so it's not just deed-restricted affordable housing opportunities within Princeton, but also the types of units that fit those middle-income families that don't necessarily qualify for a deed-restricted unit, but can't afford an expensive single-family home. And really, the best way to do that is to provide it in a form other than single-family development. The other key element, and again, it's something that we're focused on keenly here, is making sure that new development blends well with existing neighborhoods, particularly in the historic context of this area of Princeton. So that is something that as we go through the redevelopment plan process, we will be focused on. And then new construction and development, so obviously traffic, parking, congestion, circulation. We spent a lot of time talking about the safety of Stockton Street, of Hibben, people cutting through. Those are elements that we hope to address within this redevelopment plan. Are there public improvements that can occur as part of this process that will improve the outcomes related to pedestrian safety? There was a lot of discussion about children in the neighborhood, cut-through traffic. Those are all things that we really want to address through this process. And part of redevelopment, a critical aspect of the conversation with a redeveloper is what public improvements, in other words, off-site things, not necessarily on-site, that we can fold into this agreement and this process that helps provide a benefit to the greater community. And that will certainly be part of the discussion, as Council President Sachs says, as we go through this redevelopment negotiation. Those are the types of things that we'll be talking about. So redevelopment as a tool is important for Princeton, particularly on this site. Many of the development projects that we've had recently were, again, part of the affordable housing process. There's a requirement in that we leave a lot of the cost-generative features in zoning out. It's one of the critical, I'll call it, rules of the Council on Affordable Housing's regulations, which we use and implement in this process. And it's really, we have to make sure that we're not requiring the developer to do more than what is just absolutely necessary so that we can help subsidize the production of affordable housing. The conversation in redevelopment is very different. The incentives that we can put in to a redevelopment plan that allow us for better outcomes are, hopefully what we will employ here in this situation. And those site design elements that we hope to address are better, more accessible open space, better stormwater, address parking, the visibility of parking, its impact on neighbors, site amenities, so not just that open space, but what other elements can we incorporate into a site design that residents can take and make use of, location of buildings, their scale, their mass, and then also landscape and tree preservation. So there were many comments at the first workshop. This site has many great mature trees. I think the trees along the roadways, the London plane trees will stay, but there are many wonderful mature trees on this site that we want to look at, and through the redevelopment process can hope to preserve those. And then really our ability through this process to incentivize better architectural outcomes. So we want to have better building materials, more durable materials. We heard a lot about how the seminary had let the buildings fall into disrepair. Well, there's things we can do with building materials that'll help address that in the future, and that's one of the goals. Go ahead. So what does this all point to? I think you've heard some perspective in Council President Sachs' opening remarks. You see a lot of the planning issues that we're looking at as a professional team as we help guide the municipality through this process. So I think, why don't we have Steve address kind of, some of the framework and where we hope to go in the future, and then we'll have hopefully about an hour to hear from you all.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. So what does this all point to is, on the screen now is really the summation of the goals that we're going to be working under, and the framework that we're going to be working under as we work with the contract purchaser and potential concepts for this site to try to achieve all the things that we just talked about. So how do we contextualize what those prior uses were, both in terms of the use, but also the mass and the scale, and why is that important in terms of preserving that neighborhood element, which necessarily doesn't mean expanding the current uses to this site, but means how do you do it in a way that does not cause significant or any substantial detriment to the neighborhood scheme. How do you enhance or take advantage of the location in terms and relative location to the downtown in terms of walkability and transit? How do you diversify the housing types in the developments throughout the municipality? How do you do it in a way that helps implement policies and recommendations in the municipality's climate action plan and sustainable element? How do you affirmatively increase affordable housing obligations? I'll talk about the Madison case that Jim mentioned in a second, but it's important to realize that without that case, the moral obligation and the policy of the municipality is to increase the supply of affordable housing because of the housing crisis, and we start with that as our primary driver. But it would be irresponsible not to, in the back of our minds, realize where the courts have taken affordable housing just in the last 8 or 9 months with the Madison case, which, as Jim points out, provides now that an unmet need, of which the former borough has an unmet need of between 180 and 195 units right now, can be used as a tool by a developer to seek a builder's remedy to get a court-intervened approval for a certain level of density on the site. And if that happens, all of those tools that we just talked about in terms of redevelopment, all of these objectives become very hard to achieve. So to have that framework in the back of your mind helps even further the incentive that the municipality and the neighborhood should have in terms of leveraging the redevelopment opportunities and working together to achieve a lot of those goals. When you have an affordable housing builder's remedy case, one of the things that a municipality can't do is impose what is called cost-generative features. You know, and a lot of the things that we're talking about today and is likely to be included in a redevelopment plan are cost-generative features. Underground parking, okay? Surface parking lot stall can cost $3,000, $3,500 a space. A subsurface parking space can cost $40,000 or more per space. These are cost-generative features. The stormwater, as you heard from Jim, developer can achieve NJDEP stormwater regulatory standards and even your own municipal standards. We want to go above and beyond that for this site. Architectural design. How do we design it in a way that's attractive, that preserves that neighborhood feel in a way that does not substantially or significantly cause a detriment to the neighborhood? That's a cost-generative feature. So these are things that are important to keep in mind when we talk about the tools of redevelopment. And one last thing on affordable housing. I'm sure everybody's familiar with the term inclusivity and inclusive housing. And that's often used to talk about developments where you're having a set-aside. You know, you have some market-rate housing that subsidizes the affordable housing, which are not profitable to a developer. That's inclusive housing. We want the housing to be built together. But that inclusivity, it goes beyond just inclusive in the building. We want it inclusive throughout the municipality, and that goes to where you're locating your affordable housing. The Supreme Court in New Jersey and the New Jersey Constitution puts that obligation on every town because the public policy is we don't locate all of our affordable housing in one area of the state. Same should be true of the municipality. So it's a key driver for our considerations when we go through the process. So as I said at the beginning, we want to hear from you. We want to hear your feedback, your questions. The next steps are to work within this framework with the contract purchaser on a concept that we are all going to be proud of. It's not going to be one that achieves every one of these goals or every one of your concerns. That's not what redevelopment is. And I'll leave with one thing. When the redevelopment and housing law was adopted, one of the provisions that the legislature was wise to include was carving that out from the initiative and referendum process that is available to municipalities, meaning a redevelopment plan, redevelopment agreement cannot be subject to a referendum. And the wisdom there, which has played out over the last several decades, is the notion that redevelopment is not a yes or no question. It is not something that can be synthesized into a two-sentence referendum question. It is a series of levers and pulleys that need to be carefully negotiated between the public and the private sector to achieve a result that may not be perfect, but achieves as much of the goals while preserving as much of the protections we want in place, and in a way that is much more available and attractive to both parties than can be available even under the best zoning ordinance. And what this leads us to is a recognition that the zoning that's in place under the zoning right now for the site is likely, and I say likely because we haven't had these conversations about the concepts, but is likely insufficient from a density perspective and otherwise to satisfy the goals and objectives that the municipality has here. What that ultimately means, we'll find out when we go through the next step of the process, but we know that right now it is likely insufficient. So I'll turn that over to our roundtable discussion period, and Justin, I guess you'll walk around.
Well, I think what we're going to ask is that if you want to speak,
Okay.
just come up to the podium here. It was a little clunky trying to pass microphones around, and we had some issues with that last time. So if we could ask if you want to provide comments or if you have questions, just come up to the podium here and name and address, and we'll take it from there.
And we don't have a timer, but we would love to hear from everyone today, so if you could be respectful of that.
Am I on? Yes. My name is Felicia Spitz. I live at 5 Hazlitt Avenue in the western section. And I'm also chair of the Princeton Housing Authority. And I'm glad that I got up here first because I just want to say that I keep hearing a lot of affordable housing is for retail workers and for people that cut your grass and clean your house. And I want to tell you that's not true. It's actually, right now in the Princeton Housing Authority, which is the lowest tier of affordable housing that we have in town, 72% of our residents are senior citizens. We're also keeping out teachers, nurses, any support staff, coaches. So it's not just if you go to a restaurant, this person who brought your bread can't live here. It's a lot of people that have college degrees, that have families, that work in our town, and that help all of us have a very thriving community. So as you think about this, and as you feel, this is my neighborhood, and I don't want density, please think about the people who you're keeping out. We need all of those people to keep Princeton the wonderful, vibrant town that it is. So I encourage you, be compassionate and be thoughtful, and remember who you're keeping out. Thank you.
Testing. Testing. What is going on today? Testing.
Mic drop.
We should be okay now.
Hi there. Good morning, everybody. Anastasia Mann is my name. I live on Lilac Lane, just off Hodge Road, so a few blocks from the site that's under discussion today. And I apologize for looking like this, but I'm out having a morning in our amazing town at the farmer's market, at this little craft market, having my car washed, enjoying the fruits of this amazing town that we live in. And I just came by to say that I spent some of my formative years in subsidized housing as a child. My parents were young, middle-class people, and they couldn't afford to pay for expensive housing, and it was a really important, formative, happy time for us. And I would like other families to have that same opportunity that we all have here, that we're so lucky to have. My kids went to community park school. They walked to their friends' houses. I'm trying to stay positive, but it's not the friendliest neighborhood where I live. We've lived 24 years on Lilac Lane. We don't really talk to any of our neighbors. We would like to have some life and some community, some connection. And I think having a more mixed, less fortress-like feeling in the neighborhood is something that really all of us would benefit from. So some of my best friends in this town are local business owners whose employees have to drive vast distances to get to work in the morning and struggle with parking, etc. I think we can do better than that. We are so lucky here, and we can share. So thanks.
Good morning. My name is Linda Oppenheim. I live on South Harrison Street. I want affordable housing in my area, which is known as Jugtown. I want affordable housing there. I want more affordable housing in the area under discussion. I want more affordable housing in every area of Princeton where it makes sense, where there is infrastructure, where it's walkable, where it has easy access to public transit. I read that over 500,000 people in this country are unhoused. We can't solve the nation's problem, we can't solve the state's problem, but we can do our part. Princeton has a lovely reputation as being a liberal and progressive community. This is the moment. This is the time when we live up to our reputation. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Brian Levinson. I also live in Jugtown at 52 Patton Avenue, and I took my bike here and I went by the bazaar in front of the Arts Council, and I realized that what I value most about Princeton is people and having more people. And I think we need greater density and greater affordability and more families from all walks of life. And I'm a homeowner, and I've looked at the studies, and more density is not going to destroy property values or blow up my taxes. More density is going to make Princeton an ever more desirable place to live. So thank you.
Hi there, my name is Jessica Vieira. I live at the 86 Stockton Street, which is the home right at the corner of Edge Hill and Stockton, very close to the site. Very quickly, first of all, as I think about what has been discussed today, I'd like to thank you all for being very conscientious to the concerns of the residents, not only of the neighborhood, but of the community, and taking time to include all of our comments and our thoughts in your decision-making. I'm kind of surprised, having attended the last session, that this has become a huge discussion about affordable housing, because it was brought up last time. We talked about high-density housing, and there didn't seem to be so much contention about it. And all of a sudden today, it's the elephant in the room. What we're really boiling down all of these comments to is really what's inside and what's outside. What does it look like inside? What's the composition of the people who live there? How thick and how dense is are the units? And what does the outside look like? So if we boil, and then maybe a third element is, how does all of that impact everyone around it? First of all, affordable housing, as in terms of high-density housing, I asked last time specifically for what was the concentration of housing in the old units that were removed. We still don't have an answer to that question. I'd like to know, on the 5-acre site, in all of the units, how many units were there, and how many, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom. I'd like the breakdown and the composition of that. Because I think in making decisions about replacing what was there with something new, we'd like to understand what it was, because we understand the historic concept of sort of what the flow was. We know that there were young families there. We had no problem with that as the people, at least I speak, I think, for the people in the neighborhood. I know I speak for myself. No issue with it. However, when we think about chart number 8, which you put up, which was fantastic, and we talk about making up for the Madison case, I'd like to understand in all of those developments, How many affordable units are in all of those developments? Because when I sit today and I hear we all speak about it, I feel like this property is trying to make up for every affordable unit that we need to do, and that's not fair either, right? So tell me, how many in each of those units, so you had concentration, right? So add our units to that and say, look, we're proposing X number of units. As you continue to call him the contract purchaser, I'm not sure, apologies to Mr. Herring, but your name is now the contract purchaser. Let's talk about that. I don't know when we can actually sort of include his name if he's in contract. I'd also add just very quickly, I don't want this to be that we're just making up for it. I have no issue with affordable housing, actually. I have no issue with high-density housing. I just want to understand what it is and give us some concept of how it works. When we talk about the outside, and I'm trying to be really brief here, but when we talk about the outside, not one page talked about the school impact. Not one. We have a real issue in our schools. Our schools are bursting at the seams. We're building high-density housing all over this place. We can't meet our 2% cap on the budget, the school budget this year. Our school budget is at 2.9%, and we're making up holes. How do we do that? Where's the developer when we're talking about that? Traffic. For some reason during COVID, 206 and the Great Road have gotten every 18-wheeler going through 206. It used to be pre-COVID that I don't think those trucks, there was like a weight restriction, and I'm speaking off the cuff. I don't know the details, but I'd like the town to readdress that, because there's no way you're going to get people crossing the street of 206 when the Walmart 18-wheeler is coming up the street. No way. When you think about the elderly and children, families with children, that site right now on that street, there's no way that it's going to be a friendly spot for those people to cross the street to catch the bus. So I'd like to just wrap up about all of this and say, the sooner that we can get to the concepts and the actual picture and the details, the sooner this will all be resolved. So we've been talking and sort of shadow boxing with ourselves, but we haven't really gotten to the crux of all of this, which is what's on the inside, what's on the outside. We can give a nod to history. We can build something that looks like Drumthwacket, which ages well, or we can build something like Alphabet City or an Eastern Bloc Modern, which is not so much, and have the same concentration and make it as friendly as can be. And it's our decision. And I appreciate that we've been given this opportunity, but let's get to, we don't have a lot of time. Let's get to it. Let's make it work and make it happen. And I think we all are talking of the same thing and the same concepts. It's just, moving it forward. So thank you for the opportunity.
I just wanted to answer a few things because I think it's really important. In terms of the number of affordable units on the site before, had the agreement with the seminary gone through, there would not have been an affordable requirement. I know that some residents think that was positive, others think it's negative, but the difference between the situation then and the situation now is that Princeton's third round affordable housing settlement was passed, which requires a 20% set aside townwide, of which the seminary is now part of that. So that is a changed circumstance. In terms of, to your point about how many, this site being asked to make up for the bulk of affordable housing, I think if you look at the maps and the comment that I made about which neighborhood disproportionately bore the brunt of 25 years of Princeton's previous obligation, 1999 to 2025, 3/4 of it is within 4 blocks of the Princeton Shopping Center, the one of the few remaining middle-class neighborhoods. So, and just in terms of the economics of affordable housing, you either have inclusionary housing in which the developer includes 20%, they build it, they maintain it. There's a lot of studies to show that sort of integrated housing, it provides better outcomes for everyone. The other option is 100% municipally sponsored affordable. That comes out of your taxpayer dollars. The town pays for it, and it elevates the taxes, and it results in a town which is increasingly bifurcated, in which you have very wealthy families who are paying for 100% municipally sponsored housing, in which you have essentially segregated housing. You have people who are socioeconomically, which tends to be racially as well, segregated. Inclusionary housing, mixed income housing provides better outcomes, and in terms of where we are as a town, it's where we want to go, and it is more financially efficient for us overall. In terms of school children, just so you all know, we are not permitted by law in discussions of affordable housing to consider school children. The municipality has a constitutional obligation to provide its fair share of housing. The schools have a constitutional obligation to educate those children. That said, we understand, and we've had many discussions with the school board about the impact of our settlement. Princeton was in the unfortunate position of being on the tipping point of our schools when our settlement was settled. We were already maxed out. The municipal council is acutely aware of the needs of our schools. Every single member of the governing body either attended Princeton Public Schools, their parents did, their kids did, or in my case, all three. We care equally about our school system as we do about our town, and we have negotiated incredibly creative financial arrangements, including pilots on some of our affordable housing sites, so that we can channel that money towards school district facilities, expansions, and enhancements. It's one of the only ways in the state that you can go beyond the 2% cap. And just so you know, Jessica, it's not that the school district didn't meet its 2% cap. The municipality is obligated to fund the schools and make them whole every year. If anyone takes a hit, it's not the county, it's not the schools, it's the municipality. The schools send us a bill, we pay it. And regardless of what other circumstances there are, that's how it works. We actually, the municipality has gone above and beyond and is involved with doing some creative negotiations that would provide funding to the school district beyond the 2% cap for facilities and, as I said, maintenance and enhancement. I don't know of any other municipality in the state of New Jersey in which the council is working so hard to help their school district. So just want to say that.
Council President, if I can just add a few comments, thank you. Just to be clear, by coincidence, maybe we just said contract purchaser a lot of times, but Mr. Herring is here, and we're not, there's no hiding of the ball there. With respect to density and the comments that are made, what would be helpful, and this is where I'm going to pretend to be planner, and Jim can kick me under the table and correct me. But when you look at density, you're often looking at the factors that derive out of that density, and just saying density of an X amount per acres is what's appropriate for the site without actually contextualizing it for what those factors are doesn't really help. So what are we looking for? Things like traffic and parking, of course, and how the density affects transportation and the schools to a degree, yes. Those are the things. So when we talk about density of 10 units an acre or 30 units an acre or 1,000 units an acre, what are we looking at? What are the concerns of people who have concerns about density? What is it about the density that is driving the concern for this particular site? That is what is helpful information for us to take back and be able to determine from a planning perspective first what this site can accommodate, which, as I mentioned before, from a planning perspective, we do believe this site can accommodate more density than what the underlying zoning has. The next step would then be from a financial component, what density is necessary to achieve all of those goals and objectives. So when we talk about density, it would be helpful to know what are the things about the density that drive concern. One of the things I will say, respectfully, is that what the density was in a prior use is of no relevance. Because there are plenty of sites that have multiple different uses that end up becoming multifamily or residential use, and you don't use that as a factor. Now, we use historic data to help us analyze what the effects of that particular density was when it was in effect to be able to analyze what the future could be. But certainly any situation which, well, we know we could support that level of density, so that's what's appropriate, is a little bit of a false equivocation. But that's...
Andrew Gomery. I live on Shady Brook Lane. I've lived in this town for 48 years. I came here as an undergraduate. My kids went to public and private schools. I've commuted to New York for work, and I've owned a business in town, both in town and across Route 1 for the last 20 years. I can just say this town has changed almost unimaginably in my time here. When I first got here, Skirm's Tobacco Shop was an anchor store. We had 3 men's formal wear shops. We were probably one of the few college towns without a coffee shop. And we had a nightclub called Hootie Bras, which was in the site of what is formerly the Triumph Brewery. And during all this time, there's been just unbelievable change. But the town has been very good about growing and strengthening the things that I think make this town really great and why I want to live here. One of those, of course, is a vibrant downtown, which just continues to improve. But another is the amazing array of institutions we have here. Schools, the university, the seminary, arts council, we've got 3 housing initiatives. I can go on and on. This is a very unusual town, and of course, an extremely engaged and responsible government. The thing we haven't done is build housing. And whether you believe this is a moral obligation as I do, it is certainly a legal obligation. But either way, when teachers, police, other people who work in this town can also live in this town, the town is going to be enriched. So it is my strong hope that we will avoid litigation that can only delay the inevitable, and that we treat this project as a model for future development in the town going forward. Thanks.
Good afternoon. Good morning. Tony DeMeglio, a former resident of Princeton, New Jersey for 35 years, now living in Lawrence. I'm here to just give me my comments on what I'm thinking. When I look at what the requirements of the town is trying to achieve, this project fills 95% of the dots. I think we should stand behind it. The town needs this. For merchants in our town, who I know many of them, having people be able to walk to town, be able to shop, to go to dinner, to have drinks, is very, very important to them. The shopping center, great asset to this town. You cannot walk from the shopping center to town. So this project is very important. One of the other concerns, because I am a realtor, I have to disclose that, is that property values. Boy, we're concerned about property. We've got this big open field with black all around it, and the neighborhood's gonna come crushing down. Couple little facts. 129 Hodge Road sold in 36 days for $4.5 million. 14 Library Place sold in 14 days for $4.7 million. Even more exciting, 28 Edge Hill, which backs up to this brand new project, sold in 11 days for $940,000. So the fear of values in this town going down, this will only increase the values. My other point is I'm lucky enough to have worked with Josh Zinder on 30 Mac and Robbie Nelson at the Nelson Glass House. And some of the things we found that is going to help this development help our neighbors. One is customers and people that are right-sizing. Where do they go when they sell their 4,000 square foot house? They want to walk to town. They want it to be new. They want open spaces. This fills the deal. We have university staff. We got corporations. We have new people coming to town. This is actually the right time for this development. And the only other question I do have, because I'm very intrigued by this affordable issue, is there anybody in this room who will qualify for an affordable unit and is planning to apply? My thought was nobody. So this is the right time for this development. It's the right place, and this is the right project. Make sure this happens. Thank you.
And I just want to remind everyone that we are recording this and we're streaming it on YouTube as well, so please speak into the microphone for those reasons.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to say 2 comments. One is from my friend, Matt Malechko, who asked me to read. Is that okay? And then my own. Okay, great. So this is from my friend and colleague, Matt, who comes to these meetings often. You may have seen and heard of him, but he lives on 23 Bank Street. He says, "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the leadership of our municipal officials for convening this conversation. My name is Matt Malechko. I'm a doctoral candidate at Princeton University studying housing policy, so I'd like to offer what insight I have to contribute to this conversation. Much of what I have to offer is informed by my vocation as a researcher, but it's also informed by my lived okay. Matt is much, quieter. Oh, the mic, okay. All right. Much of what I have to offer is informed by my vocation as a researcher, but it is also informed by my lived experience navigating the unnecessary difficulties of being a renter in Princeton. First of all, as I say at every public meeting like this I attend, Princeton needs more multifamily housing, lots more. As of April 29th, a grand total of 0 apartments are available in Princeton at the current HUD fair market rent for our metro area, $1,700 for a 2-bedroom apartment. We have thousands of households on our waiting list for affordable housing in Princeton, lists that continue to grow every single month. A great deal of research confirms that the undersupply of housing drives housing unaffordability in Princeton, but also very high levels of residential segregation and social inequity in our surrounding area. Much of this is due to our failure to build multifamily and affordable housing in Princeton, largely because of our arbitrary rules and regulations that make it very difficult, if not impossible. That is, our policies and practices, decisions that we contemplate at meetings like today, represent a key barrier in us promoting housing affordability, integration, and a more equitable Princeton for all. So committing to policies and practices that will help us promote more housing, especially affordable housing, is absolutely critical and needs to be the priority by way we weigh all other priorities. But we don't need to develop more we don't need to just develop more multifamily housing. We need to develop it in a way that is consistent with smart growth principles. The evidence makes clear that this means promoting residential densities in the right places. In other words, places that are already developed, places that are walkable and short distances from employers and public transit, and places that could accommodate a mix of land uses. All of this sits under consideration for this redevelopment project, and clearly this fits the description. So, if we care about responsible development, we would support redevelopment at higher than currently allowed densities on these sites that will promote housing opportunities for our neighbors, as well as more environmentally sustainable development patterns. There are examples of these kinds of developments with higher densities in municipalities such as the Lakeside graduate student housing, which demonstrates higher densities are totally consistent with high quality and environmentally sound development. We can't afford to waste an opportunity like this to make more progress by building at the low densities dictated by the current zoning on the sites. Fortunately, we can do all these things and retain great things about the part of town. None of the priorities that I'm advocating for are at odds with promoting a reasonable amount of open space, tree coverage, stormwater management, good architecture that fits in the surrounding context, and more. This can really be a win-win for Princeton, so let's embrace that and let's show the way forward. Thank you very much. So that's, yeah, okay. So then I can introduce myself. So I'm Emily Miller. I am a graduate student at Princeton. I'm also here to kind of represent my graduate student and undergraduate constituents from the PMDC. So I currently live in Forbes College, which is right across from Wawa, and I'm currently in my own process of trying to find an affordable place to live here as a graduate student. And it's gone very poorly so far. But I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit more about kind of my own kind of experience as a researcher, as well as kind of there was a conversation like this in my hometown in Colorado, and I just thought maybe I could kind of offer my perspective from a different context. So there was an affordable housing unit that got built behind my hometown in Colorado. I live in a kind of a small desert resort community. It's walkable. It kind of has all this nice charm that here at Princeton. And I remember going to these meetings in high school, and there was all this kind of up in arms, and people were worried, and about the architecture. They were worried about all sorts of things. And the units got built, and it was really lovely. We live in the desert, and so there was all this kind of really special care to make kind of the surrounding houses look like kind of the desert. So that was kind of nice. So I think there's people might be concerned about like, oh, matching the architectural style, and affordable housing has come a long way from what people might be imagining, and it might look very nice. You have a lot of tools that you can use to make it beautiful. I think there's also some kind of concerns about schools. One thing that I think is really interesting is New Jersey actually has the highest out-migration of people my age, so millennials. More millennials are leaving New Jersey than any other state, and I don't think that's because of choice. I think people really like and want to live here, but it is unaffordable. And I guess, going back to the schools, so Matt talked a lot about the research for housing, and honestly, building affordable housing time and time again, a lot of research that has come out, specifically out of Princeton University, from the likes of Matt Desmond, Doug Massey, Pat Sharkey, has shown time and time again that actually it's a tide that rises all boats. So people benefit who just move here. Also, no one who would lived here prior sees any sort of negative. This is true in housing and property values, and it's also in safety as well, kind of the neighborhood, and it's also true in schools. So schools that integrate and schools that have affordable housing, everyone benefits. And so I just wanted to kind of highlight that research as well. And thank you for having this meeting, and it's been really interesting kind of seeing what goes on behind the scenes. People might think grad students and undergrads are transient people, but honestly, we kind of are we spend so much money in downtown at Junbi and at NB and all these places, and so I think really our voices do matter. And my undergrads really were excited when I said I was coming over here this morning. They care about this a lot, and so I just wanted to put that out there too as well. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Sean Jackson. I'm the CEO at Isles, and I recognized in the invitation today that it is not just residents of the community, but interested parties. And Isles is an organization that has existed for 40-some years, working throughout Mercer County with an aim of fostering family self-reliance, and in the context of this discussion, healthy, sustainable communities. And both of these primary aims of our mission really come together in a project like this. We're involved in this community. I don't live here, but our organization works here. We work with the Housing Authority on energy efficiency efforts for units there and bringing in better equipment and green equipment, as we say, to foster healthier and safer homes, and have been proud to work with the agency for a number of years on that. We work with HIP on financial assistance and guidance for tenants in their buildings, and we continue to work in communities like this with older housing stock around lead paint remediation. So we have a stake in what goes on and care about what goes on, and want to applaud, the members of the council and the mayor for the way you've approached this process. And I understand for the community and for the neighborhood in particular, that's challenging, but it's been a very thoughtful process. And I just want to share with you a couple things that we see from the work we do around the county. And we do talk in other communities about this issue, about the need to provide workforce and affordable housing in the community where people work, so that the folks, whether they be at the university or at Mediterra or at the schools or anywhere in your community, have an opportunity to live in this community. And we have seen that that is an important marker for families trying to gain self-sufficiency, especially when they're on the lower end of the economic scale. They have so many challenges already. So to be able to be in a community where they can walk to work, where they can get public transit to work, and they don't need to rely on their own car and car insurance and all those challenges, that helps. We know from the families that we work with that try to get to this community every day to work, the challenges that they face. And so increasing the number of units that are available for working families and affordable units is imperative to help make your community more sustainable, and I would concur with the other speakers that ultimately enhances the value of your community in many ways. I appreciate that it's a challenging process. I've been an elected official. I know it's not easy, and I applaud you all for taking on the process you are. It is not always easy, and you can't always get everybody on the same page, but you're weighing really important issues that are important to be discussed and evaluated. We urge you to move forward with something that recognizes the import of providing housing for everybody that's a part of this community. So, thank you for a few minutes.
My name is Jane Scott. I live on Battle Road in the Institute neighborhood, not far from this site. One of the things we haven't talked about much today is the taxable status of this property. It will be moving from institutional ownership to private ownership, which means that it will become taxable. And one of the things we're known for in this community, in addition to low housing inventory is high property taxes. No surprise to any of you. Keeping in mind that the developer will be paying taxes is important because it helps understand the balance between density and viability, financial viability of the project. And the payment of taxes will help address the concern about schools and other concerns about the impact of more density upon the community. So it's a welcome development from my point of view, and I applaud the council for its active stance in moving forward with the redevelopment. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Amy Mayer, 23 Overbrook Drive. I don't have much to add to the many eloquent and informative comments that have come before. I just wanted, I said I don't have much to add to the eloquent and informative comments that we've heard so far. I just wanted to add that I also applaud the planning department and the council for all of their work on this site and enthusiastically support going forward with the redevelopment plan. From a personal perspective, I live in the Littlebrook neighborhood, and I don't feel that I've taken it on the nose with the development that's happening at the shopping center and Thanet. I'm excited about it. I also recognize that Seminary site is a very special opportunity for us to provide more multifamily housing in a that meets smart growth principles. And I'm excited about the opportunity for that housing to include income-restricted units and also market rate units. I mean, I would love to live in that neighborhood. So thank you all.
And clearly, we have many more people in line that would like to speak, but we also have about a dozen people joining us on Zoom. A few already have their hands raised, but if you're watching on Zoom and you would like to speak after the speakers in person, please raise your virtual hand. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Chris Sturm. I live in the Riverside neighborhood of Princeton, and I missed your introductions. I got here a few minutes late, so I actually don't know who you are because I don't usually come to these meetings.
So I'm Steve Malenik. I'm an attorney with Greenbaum Rowe, and we are the municipality's redevelopment council.
Jim Kyle from Kyle McManus Associates and Hopewell, we're the redevelopment planners.
And I'm Justin Lesko, the municipality's planning director.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Nice to meet you. And I really do thank our council and their staff for showing up and giving all of us this opportunity to talk about what is happening in this particular neighborhood and is going to be happening even more across the town. The third round is, just right before the fourth round. So I moved to Princeton 25 years ago with my 3 little kids because I was living out in Skillman and really wanted a walkable community with neighborhood schools, a place where my kids could ride their bikes to school, where it might be expensive, but I knew it would be a great investment. Our home is our biggest asset. And where there were parks and trees and housing. I'm sure we all share this. And change is happening faster now than ever before. It's whether we want it or not. And so it faces us, it confronts me as I talk with my friends, as I talk with my husband about what I value. And I'm concerned that I won't be able to ride my bike as safely if there's a lot more traffic. And so I really appreciate the commitment to sustainability in this town. I love trees and parks, and I love our history. We all do. And we don't want to see it gone. But I also don't want Princeton to continue to be the elite enclave that it has been and in many ways and still is. I really value the diversity of the kids in the Princeton School District. All 3 of my kids went all the way through. And that was one of the main reasons we moved here from Montgomery, because that was, at that time, completely not diverse. And that has really enriched all of our lives. And I'm not even talking about like the people who work in town, just our direct experience. And so I really feel a personal pleasure, I believe, or not pleasure, but I feel really good that we can share our school district with other people because we know it's going to change their lives too. So just wanted to share that, my personal take. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Angela Lee. I'm currently a doctoral candidate at Princeton University, and thank you for having me here. I wanted to speak as someone considering, along with my fiance, our future in Princeton. I've been here for 3 years. My doctoral program is 6 years long, and during that time, a lot of life things have been happening. I've been very excited for our future together in Princeton. I used to live in the Lakeside Apartments, which is an affordable housing unit area that is sponsored by the university. Currently, my fiance and I live along Canal Point Road, which is actually very close to where the current Princeton Theological Seminary students are forced to live, sort of, or that's where their housing is now. I wanted to just tell you a little bit about my experience as a student and sort of what it's like as a young person trying to figure out our early careers and why this is important to me. First, it's challenging to get to campus despite the proximity of our housing on Canal Point. Because of the way that the roads are built, I still have to ask my partner to drive me to campus. It's a 10-minute drive from my apartment to campus, and I have to be on campus 4 or 5 times a day. If we lived in housing a bit closer, that would help with the commute, and I think it would be great for sustainability as well. Princeton has welcomed us with open arms. We really love the green space here. We have loved the amenities and the cultural facilities here. And we know that there are a lot of grad students who have formed networks and communities in the neighborhood and want to stay, especially as they're thinking about their family and their plans for the future. However, planning for our future is hard when there's not housing in the area. We have, at the moment, moved to West Windsor and hope to stay here as long as we can, but having more residences in the area for young families, for students, would be fantastic in that realm. We have gotten involved in institutions like the local historical society, and now I guess I'm coming to these things, but we have loved the way that Princeton has welcomed us. We might not solve the affordable housing crisis all at once, but in the lives of one family or one person, this type of policy makes a difference, and I thank you for considering my thoughts. And that shouldn't hold us back from questioning sort of what the facilities look like and involving the community in these processes as we continue onward. But thank you for giving us the space to express our opinions. I'm in support of the affordable housing and would love to continue to be involved in hearing more about it as I continue my doctoral degree and my life in Princeton, and hopefully stay here for more years to come. So thank you all so much.
My name is Jane McLennan. My husband and I live on the corner of Edge Hill and Mercer and have for the last 30 years. So I'm part of the neighborhood of TRW. And I'm also a member of the subcommittee of Princeton Coalition for Responsible Development. So we have been working on this particular project for what seems almost like 30 years, but it hasn't. And so we're grateful that finally this is open to the public and we have some input, because it's been very frustrating up to this point. My principal reason in speaking today is to briefly address what I think has been and continues to be a red herring, with apologies to Jamie, and that's affordable housing. I can say categorically that no one on the PCRD committee opposes affordable housing. We understand and appreciate the need for implementation of more equitable housing policies, and that includes affordable housing on the TRW site. I think there's probably no one who would disagree with me on that. And one of the reasons I say that is that in our view, we feel that we are living in the midst of affordable housing. The seminary is the largest neighbor in our hood, and without question, the Mercer Hill, Frog Hollow area of Princeton is filled with totally subsidized housing and a mixture of ethnicities, of races, of ages. I know we have been characterized as old, some of us are, and affluent, some of us not so much, but our neighborhood is quite diverse. And we welcome that. We understand that that would be part of affordable housing, and I think no one would argue against that. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. My name's Matt Roden. I'm at 86 Stockton on the corner of Edge Hill and also adjacent to the campus. I have 95 theses. Just kidding. I actually have 3 points and 2 questions for the panel. So the first point is that I'm a little confused about one thing that I've heard today, and that is sort of a re-adjudication of the question of affordable housing. And there's a lot of energy spent today around defending the idea of affordable housing as part of this project. And so I want to ask a show of hands. Is anyone in the room truly and categorically opposed to inclusion of some level or some percentage of affordable housing as part of this project? Seeing none, I recommend that we stop debate on affordable housing. It's going to be part of what's happening here. So that's point one. Point two, oh, sorry, yeah. The last point is that with 0 hands shown opposing categorically the inclusion of some level of affordable housing, that we should end debate on that point. And so I suggest that we move the debate. My second point is it's not what we're doing, it's how we're doing it, right? And so I think that there are reasonable debates that can be had around density and around architecture and all those things. But I think that we all can align around one thing, and that is that we have to do it right. We can't mess this up. This is a gateway position in the community. It's surrounded by, very unique homes. This is an extraordinary place to live, and it's an extraordinary community. It's got to be done right. So let's all focus our energy into the input that the developers, the designers of the town needs to get it right. Which now brings me to the third point, which is the clock is ticking. Play ball. Because if we let this go to builder's remedy, we're at risk of winding up with a Soviet-era, low-cost construction that maximizes a builder's margins and profitability. And that's not what we want either. Okay, so 2 questions to the panel. One is, there's a property owned by the seminary that's at the corner of Hibben and Mercer. It's like a football field right now. And so what I've been asked, what are the plans for that piece of property, and is that part of the TRV redevelopment project or not? So that's one question. Second question is for council. We've heard 2 references today about the recent legal rulings and the implications it has on our planning, and I completely lost the thread on what we're talking about there and what the implications are. So if council can clarify what happened and what does it mean to us?
Soccer field on Mercer, that's part of the area in need of redevelopment, but this conversation is more focused on the former tenant Roberts Whitley parcels up there on 206. Why is it separate? Because we understand the contract purchaser has those sites. The tenant Roberts Whitley ones.
So
I think if you look at that parcel geographically, it's distinct from the TRW parcels. Those are all kind of, conjoined, so to speak. So we haven't necessarily been thinking about what is going to happen with that property.
Yeah, I think the upshot is that the community should have some input on that redevelopment as well.
Okay.
Yeah, with respect to the case, and I think the debate over affordable housing today, I certainly know from my perspective, I did not come in thinking that there was anybody in this room that was going to be outrightly opposed to affordable housing. I think where the importance of affordable housing here is because this is going to be an inclusionary site, that deals with the number of affordable housing units you're going to yield is directly proportionate to the number of market rate units you're going to have. So that is where the density comes in. So nobody can be opposed in this room to affordable housing. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's the end of the discussion, because it is part and parcel of the density discussion. The number of density or the percentage of density allowed is going to directly correlate with the number of affordable housing units that you're able to take off your unmet need. So it is an important factor. The relevance of the Madison case is, as Jim pointed out before, historically, you go through affordable housing rounds, usually every 10 years, and we just concluded or are about to conclude the third round of affordable housing, the fourth round coming up in 2025. And historically, when a municipality settles or gets its judgment of compliance and repose from the court, you're good until the next round. You are immune from any builder coming in and seeking a builder's remedy against the municipality for that round, which again could be a decade. What's different now since September is that is no longer the case when there's a change in circumstances on a site that has been used in that settlement as part of what's called the vacant land adjustment. And when you have an unmet need like the former borough does, and this property is within that, of 180 to 195 units, this case now enables the developer, the property owner, to come in with a builder's remedy suit, notwithstanding the immunity we have from the settlement, and obtain a judgment that density of a certain amount is permitted.
Yeah, I think you mentioned it specifically. You know, we don't want to get into a situation, you know, where that happens. And really what the Madison case said was that could happen here. So that's why we're not going to spend a lot of time focusing on it, but it's something that we have to be cognizant of as we move through this process.
Hi, Tom Pinio. I live on Van Deventer Avenue. In her book, The New Jim Crow, Michelle Alexander writes, "The centuries-long struggle to birth a truly inclusive, egalitarian democracy, a nation in which every voice and every life truly matters, did not begin with us, and it will not end with us. The struggle is as old as the nation itself, and the birth process has been painful, to say the least. My greatest hope and prayer is that we will serve as faithful midwives in our lifetimes and do what we can to make America finally what it must become." While she was writing about the carceral state, I think that all applies to housing. That's why I'm here. That's why I care so deeply about this. And it's also the reason that I'm here to give an enthusiastic and full-throated support to this council and smart growth and the municipal perspective that it's been outlined here today. I think all the details are there. I don't need to recount those. But I think it's vital that we do this in a way that acknowledges the concentrated costs to this neighborhood while also critically acknowledging the diffuse benefits that will accrue to this town and to this region. The density. There are actually two D words. One is the density word, but the other is the diffuse benefit words. So when we think about density, we also have to think about the diffuse benefits that I mentioned earlier. I think, however, I am in complete agreement with Matt and with Jessica that it's time to put some specifics on the board. And I think this is where we need to put Mr. Contract Purchaser front and center, and let's have a civilized conversation about how we can accomplish these not inherently incompatible goals. I'd also like to, for the benefit of this case, as well as the dialogue in other areas in town, I'd like to flip the script a little bit. it seems that much of the narrative is about scarcity and loss. We talk about our housing obligation as though it's a plate of overboiled broccoli that we have to eat. It's not. Couldn't we talk, instead about obligation, could we talk about opportunity? Instead of scarcity, could we focus on the abundance? Instead of feeling under siege, could we think about embrace? Instead of loss, gain, exclusion, inclusion, resident of a neighborhood, citizen of this town and of this region and of this country. Instead of cost, benefit. Instead of lawyers, architects. And I think this is, I know, sorry, dude. And this comes back to your point, Jessica, I mean, and Matt. I think this is, at the end of the day, where a lot of this has got to get sorted out. Instead of unaffordable, affordable. Instead of them, us. Instead of neglect, and I know that a lot of people have talked about this site as being one that has suffered neglect. Could we talk about care? And instead of segregation, could we talk about inclusion and the diversity that we have to benefit from? Getting back to sort of the next step thing, there are so many examples of successful architecture. We only have to turn to the campus to look at how the architecture of today can be compatible with this incredible neighborhood. Huge fan of the form of many of the Stedman homes. I think finally we saw that radius, that half-mile radius around that radiates from this point. I've thought about that same radius, but in a different way. Think about all of the issues, global issues that have been tackled within a half mile of this site, between the seminary, between the university, the Institute for Advanced Study. Do I think too highly of ourselves if I were to suggest that we could be a model for how we come up with a successful solution here, in other parts of town, in other parts of the state, and for this country? We don't need to, as I've said before, we don't need to model our discourse on the national discourse. So I'd like to just flip the script and think about the possibilities. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Ann Weber. I live at 498 Stockton Street, and I am actually an architect. Someone asked the question, what is this sort of scare about density? And I think the issue in a lot of the minds of the people in the community is scale. And you also said that what was there prior to the demolition is now moot. So now we're looking at this site as more of a clean slate. Yes, there were 3-story buildings on that site, but they were placed in a very specific location. That the scale of the street, of this entrance to the community was not 3-story buildings. The Whiteley Gym, yes, it was right along 206, and that's a big box. But when that was designed, and I believe that was designed by Ralph Bowen, who was one of our, important architects of the past in Princeton. It was designed with a residential scale building a 1.5-story building facing Hibben and facing Stockton. And then there were trees in front of Whiteley Gym. So what I think the issue of density relates to scale. And just very close to here, the Avalon development at the hospital, which was one of the ones in your chart. You put that down on 206, where Roberts and Tennant were. I think that's not an image that's gaining a lot of support. Now, as an architect, I know that we can create density with an appropriate scale for the community on this site, but I know it's not easy. And it's much easier to take Avalon and put it down there. So, well, I think everybody supports redeveloping this site in a way that is good for Princeton. Having a big box stuck down on that site is not something that I think anybody will be happy with, except perhaps the residents who look out rather than looking from the outside. So, thank you.
Good morning. My name is Nat Bodigheimer. I'm a resident of the Littlebrook neighborhood, and I'm here to express my support for accommodating housing and residents on this site, but I also do want to make the point, a couple of points that a number of others have made. The one is related to the idea of what can we do, what's within our control to make our community a better place to live. And the first thing I guess I want to point out is that, I think many people in the room who can remember what has happened in the communities around Princeton between 1990 and 2020. About 130,000 new people have moved into Franklin, Plainsboro, Montgomery, Lawrence. It's a lot of people. And every one of those residents is a resident who, if they want to benefit from accessing the amenities in Princeton, have to drive here. And to a certain extent, that's a benefit because there's interest in economics here, but it's also an impact to us. And to the extent that people are driving through our community, that's an impact to us. It makes us feel out of control. We want to stop growth in Princeton, but we have no control over what happens around us. The best way to take control of the quality of our community is to incorporate people into our community and add design elements that create an expectation within the community and outside of the community that this is a place where you can walk and bike and take transit, and you don't depend on a car to get to what's around you, and also that there are amenities in your community that are accessible. I note, as a new frequent user of the dog park, how many people are walking to the dog park there, and that you don't have to drive someplace now outside of the community to do that particular thing. So I just want to emphasize that I think all the points I've heard about inclusion and diversity are positive. That density in itself is not a concern. The most important thing on the site is to bring people to the area who are not going to have to drive, and to make the property a feature for the surrounding community more broadly, that it be permeable, that it include elements that are beneficial to others. And so, I mean, that's the sum mostly of my comments, that we can take control of the quality of our community by focusing on how to make this site an attribute and a benefit to everyone else in the community. And that everything that I've heard out of the design process so far says that those are things that you're thinking about, and I'm looking forward to participating in the process to vet, to see those things realized over time. Thanks.
My name is Dozier Hammond. I live on Lee Avenue. And I just want to say that I support this project. I support good design. I do want it to be an attractive project, but I also want it to be as comfortable, as high a density as possible without impacting the neighborhood too much, because as they said, the density will involve how much affordable housing we get from this project. I actually hope we could also look at ways to, number one, increase that percentage of the total units that could be going beyond 20%. That'd be wonderful to me if it was 30% or 40%, maybe even more. And just to underline the fact that Princeton, as we all know, because our property values are rising and they're getting great, which means people are moving out and people can't move in of certain socioeconomic statuses. So we also, I don't know if we can do it in this project, look at middle income people as well, though I wouldn't take that away at all from the affordable people. Some ways to make middle class housing available in this town as well. Again, this project can't quite do that. The other thing is that unfortunately under COA rules, people who live there now don't automatically go to the top of the list, as most of you know, for affordable housing here. It's open to it's open to the whole country. It's marketed in a 3-county region. And so a lot of people from Princeton do get that housing, but a lot of people don't, especially the people who've been forced out or about to be forced out. So I want to keep all those things in mind when you're thinking about affordable housing in Princeton. And doing this, again, I think it can be designed beautifully, et cetera. I hope we get some good affordable housing out this, and we look at other ways to make Princeton more affordable so that we actually have a working class here and a middle class, as well as just an upper middle and upper class. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Torian. I live on Lee Avenue. Dozier is my neighbor, and I started to get up today to talk about the perspective of a younger family, and then I remembered what I looked like in the mirror this morning, and I thought maybe that's not appropriate. But I did come here, moved to town in my mid-30s with my family from the South, and we were hit by incredible sticker shock. This place is daggone unaffordable for rentals and for home purchases. And so we rented for a few years at prices that you could only dream of finding now. I mean, there's nothing. It was $2,000 to rent, and you can't find that anywhere now for a family. We were a family of 3 at that point. We finally bought a house after about 2 years in town without really looking. I was just looking online. It was $200,000 below the median price back then. It was the only house we looked at because it was the only house that we could have ever dreamed of affording. So while I can't speak as a young family person anymore, I can speak from that perspective. And I can say that we need more housing density, more rental housing density for young families, for healthcare workers, teachers, support staff, all the people that I want to be my neighbors. And so just wanted to say that. And then also I am on the board of Housing Initiatives of Princeton. And so I also have the perspective of the families who need affordable housing. Incredibly hardworking families that the moment they move into our housing, we have a transitional housing program, 12 to 24 months of supportive housing in our transitional housing with the goal of moving them into a permanent affordable unit. We have to get them to apply for affordable units the minute they move into our housing, because even then there's a good chance that they won't get their name called in time before they have to graduate, and then they're struggling to figure out how to afford something. In the broader community, it is impossible nearly to find something in Princeton if it's not declared as affordable housing. So I am excited with all of the architects in town who can help to make this development beautiful, to fit into the fabric of the beautiful historic neighborhood that surrounds it. But I am also just wanted to express my support for housing density in that lot because it's such an accessible spot to downtown, to the transit, at the Dinky station, as well as bus stations or bus stops. So thank you so much.
Good morning. I'm Mehdi Malaki. I live on Edgerston Road. I think this is the first time I've heard of a community coming together to support a development, which is, to be honest, quite odd. If you look at the newspapers, you always hear about communities opposing development. So this is to the planning board. I think the fact that we actually just had one lady speak, mention issues and considerations and concerns should not be drowned by the numerous individuals that supported or are supporting this development. So I just, I hope you guys can do a survey of all the residents within a quarter mile of this development to hear their concerns. I'm not against affordable housing. I'm very pro, but I also think that we need to be fair to those living very close to the site. So, and again, I think we had the ratio of the number of people that spoke for development versus against, or maybe concerned. Just the ratio just doesn't make sense to me. Going back to area in need of development. If I dump my trash on my lawn and I let my house, don't maintain my house, can I come to the planning board and argue that my lot needs to be redeveloped? That I want to put a development? Why not? I'll do it. I'll put 100 units up and 20% affordable housing. I don't mind. I don't mind. I would do it. I'd fund it myself too. But I would. But the issue is, you have an institution, right, with endowment, with money. They neglect. I don't know what they did. I don't know the history very well. But a site that is half a mile away from the governor's mansion on a major street, somehow they were able to get that somehow classified as an area in need of development. If we were in Russia, I'd say, yeah, that makes sense. We're not in Russia. I don't know who approved that. I would have loved, and by the way, again, I am all for affordable housing. But I would have loved for that site to be parceled into 12 half-acre single-family homes. Would have been consistent with the neighborhood. But instead, I'm sure the university made a lot of money selling those properties. What? The university doesn't own it. So who owned it? But I think you get my point. What happened to that money? How much was it, by the way? But how much is it? Do we know? What is the purchase price? Really? I know it's a private deal, but if I neglect my property and I get it zoned, then I could also argue.
Well,
Yeah, let me finish.
Go ahead, you finish.
And so that's point number 2. And then point number 3, it's really the traffic that I'm concerned about. Really is. I'd love to have more graduate students living there. I'd love to have the nurses, the police officers, everyone living there. I think that would be wonderful. But I am concerned about the traffic. I don't know how many people take the 206 going into town from the governor's mansion. I'd like to see how many people take that. Not a lot, actually. So those of us that take that road into town or take our kids to school will get impacted. And speaking of schools, I moved here 2.5 years ago. And I'm probably one of very few people that moved to New Jersey. We went to the public schools, and it was during COVID, but we saw the classrooms. They were packed. I didn't have a job, by the way. But I ultimately decided that, you know what? I'm going to put my kids in private school. I'm paying private tuition. I'm paying high property taxes. I'm not taking advantage of the schools because they're overcrowded. I think we need to take that into account because people like me I'd love to send my kids to public school and not pay tuition, trust me. But I also got to think about my kids. I got to think about the community. I do. Because if I put my kids in school, that's less room for other people. So I know I mentioned a lot of issues there, but really I think that the two things that stand out, number one, traffic, and number two, I'd love to know how they got that property or properties designated as areas in need of development. Thank you.
I can address the first one. My office would be happy to provide you with the 2018 area in need of redevelopment study.
Yeah, so first of all, just to get the easy stuff, we agree that traffic is a major consideration. It's been on the slides, and as we go through the process, it is something that is going to inform what the density and whatever, the development will be. And then the second quicker issue is with respect to the contract price, Mr. Herring's contract. Nothing up to this point has been driven by that contract or the concepts that he's proposing or would like to propose. This is the second meeting I've been in front of you. I can tell you right now, I have not seen a plan for Mr. Herring at all. I've seen nothing. Because up until this point, we have been focused on what from a planning perspective on this site is appropriate and what from a municipal perspective is the goals and objectives for this site. Now the next phase of that is let's find out what those concepts are and let's try to marry those with those goals and objectives. With respect to the area in need of redevelopment, those investigation studies are all available, and this has been accepted by the Department of Community Affairs as an area in need of redevelopment. It is not the case that you can have an area in need of redevelopment designated simply because of maintenance violations. It's not the case. And those get overturned in court all the time when they're pretextual to trying to get advantaged zoning when you have a property owner that just doesn't maintain their property. Redevelopment is a strict includes a strict list of criteria. There are 8 of them that need to be, one or more have to be met in order to enjoy the benefits of redevelopment, which is to take property that under traditional zoning has to be zoned in the context of a zone and take it and use tools that without which you would not be able to redevelop that property. And that's what happened here. There were criteria that were met. They were supported by and accepted by the Department of Community Affairs. And to suggest now, looking back, that it shouldn't have been, so we should throw out the tools that are available when we have all these goals and objectives, and we can now say the only way to accomplish those is through the tools available through redevelopment, would be passing up on an opportunity. So.
One last comment. I actually, I think, when it comes to development, we should encourage developers to be local. So I have nothing against the contractor. I want to make that clear. And in fact, I think the fact that he is from town, he lives in town, I understand, that's a positive. But, in totality, going forward, I'd like the planning board to always take that into consideration. I'd rather have a local developer building the Avalon, building the developments, as opposed to someone coming in from the outside. Thank you.
That's where we go.
Hello. My name is David Shore. I live at 498 Stockton Street, so not even really close to the area in need of redevelopment, but something that's on my mind is its impact. And I have been a 30-year resident along Stockton Street. And let me back up and for a minute say, who doesn't love diversity? This is what we might get there is going to be great for the population and diversity and mix of our community. That's not my my concern at all. I guess it goes back a little bit to the area in need of redevelopment, but let me talk about what I really want to talk about. Is on the slides this morning, many times comments came up saying quality architecture, quality materials, quality design. As I understand it, as an area in need of redevelopment, we don't have any of our normal commissions or reviews that are going to look at this architecture. I don't think historic preservation is going to be looking at it, even though it's mentioned as an element in the community. I've served for 30 years on the Historic Preservation Commission. I hope I get to do so some more. But our process, when we get some major new development, is very difficult to talk about getting a quality design or a sense that the project fits in its place. And we're going to be under a lot of pressure here as the council president opened our remarks this morning saying, you know, there's only certain things you can have. And I think as a community, that was kind of hard to hear. All right, tell me what you said. You said that we are going to be driven by budget, and there's a lot of things we're not going to be able to have. Maybe that could be explained to us, because that's not been clear to the community. Anyway, I want to really emphasize to everybody who's here, who's very concerned about what this project's going to look like, that the process for actually reviewing that is somewhat of a mystery. And we need to understand what that's going to be. Maybe there even needs to be a special coalition of architects who looks at this. But anyway, under the standards that we have for historic preservation and new development in historic areas, I don't think we're going to get that review. I asked Elizabeth Kim, the staff member, if she was clear on that either. We're not. So we want to make sure that we can at least be doing the function that we do to try and make projects come out as well as they do in town. The second thing I want to bring up, and I think somebody else has mentioned this a couple of times, is I haven't heard anything about what we're going to do about this change of use and traffic, and we have such a difficult traffic situation in that area. I want to know if, like, some other sacred cows will be looked at for opening up traffic, some of the roads that are closed off. You know, could Springdale be opened as a way to get more service, more cars and accommodation into this neighborhood? Probably not a good topic to bring up, but I'm trying to say we need to be thinking much broader than just the site. And I hope that that carries through in everything that happens from here forward.
So there is no mystery. This process is a precursor to the traditional zoning procedures that still need to be adhered to. Once there's a redevelopment agreement in place, the same process that a developer would need to go through to get approvals, I'm trying to answer your question, sir. The same processes that have to go through, including full site plan review, are still in place. So still planning board has to review this, public meetings, notices, same process. Did you want to address some?
Michael Floyd, 64 Harris Road. I was at the last meeting, and I'm impressed how this has developed, and hope going forward this team that you set up really can progress. And is it? Sorry, I'm sorry. Anyway. I was at the last meeting and impressed by the progress you've made since then and the organization and the outreach to the community. Couple comments I want to make. I agree with some of the points that Dozier Hammond made, the concern about affordability and where we'll end up with this. A lot of folks spoke about affordability and hope to have a inclusive community. Again, I do worry, and I just encourage you in your negotiations with a contract purchaser on the feasibility side, on the economics, on the numbers. One member of your team, I don't know who that is, who's your financial consultant on this, but coming back to affordability, if you can get deeper affordability out of the developer, I hope you do. I understand that's a very slim chance. And I say that I hope you get deeper affordability. The way the Fair Housing Act is set up, as you know, it doesn't reach down too far as far as affordability, whether it's on, this is an 80-20 deal, 80% market, 20% affordable. Only a small percentage will be a restaurant cook can afford. Only a small percentage will be a landscaper worker can afford. You will not get that out of the Fair Housing Act unless a developer voluntarily wants to structure his rents, even on the affordable, to meet that need. And even on your market jobs, in my opinion, where Princeton rents are now, it never ceases to amaze me. So, as you talk about workforce housing, this will have trouble producing workforce housing on the Princeton market. You know, if you can get $5,000 a month for a two-bedroom apartment new, or $6,000, you're talking $60,000 to $72,000 a year. And if you only, and if somebody can afford that at 50% of their income as opposed to the 30% that you want to target, you're talking upwards of $160,000 to $200,000. So what you're going to get out of this, and I appreciate, I come from an affordable housing background, the concern of the affordable housing advocates that you heard today, but put it in context. You're not going to get, you're going to miss a whole lot of people. And you'll get people, in my opinion, I'll say it, a lot of people selling their $1 million homes and downsizing because they can afford that $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year rent.
Hi, I'm Arifa Khandwala. I live in the Riverside section of, can you hear me? Yes. I'm Arifa Khandwala. I live in the Riverside section of Princeton, close to a property that is also being eyed for development. So I am all for affordable housing and dense housing, because one of the reasons we moved to Princeton from the city was walkability to town. It was diversity in the schools. And in the end, I didn't quite end up getting that because we couldn't afford it. We live further away from the town. And frankly, if I could redo it, I would love to live in one of these apartments that are going to be constructed for denser housing, so my son can have a community. He's an only child. So just want to say that out there, when the time comes for Riverside, I'll be there supporting the growth too. So thank you.
Would you like to speak?
So I think we have two more commenters, and then we have, I think, at least one or two on Zoom that we're going to get to, but then we'll try to wrap up because it is about 12:35. So, but we do want to, give everybody the opportunity.
Okay, thanks. Hi, my name is Dina Arison, and I am the past owner of an ecological farm on the corner. Okay. Okay. Hi, my name is Dina Arison, and I am the past owner of an ecologically pristine, beautiful farm on the border of Princeton and Lawrence, right at 4200 Mercer Road. And our family farmed there for 30 years, and we sold our farm to Princeton Theological Seminary. to Craig Barnes and Ian Torrance, who I knew back in 2010. Well, I recently found out that the seminary has purchased neighboring properties next to our farm and our old farm, and they want to build housing. So I'm here today to say they want to build housing for their students, and they've applied for their first application, whatever that is. So their plans for the next 100 years is probably to destroy maybe not 5 acres of beautiful wetlands that if you drive by in June, you could see the night sky light up in fireflies and the stars and the wetlands and the wildlife and the trees and the growth there. They're just so beautiful. And my fear is that they're going to be filled in. DEP will allow them to destroy the wetlands and build more student housing and affordable housing, which I get it. I'm a poor farmer, so I understand about the need for housing. But I'm also a person who is a believer in preservation, farm preservation. Our farms in Princeton, I mean in Lawrence and the area, they're disappearing, they're hemorrhaging. And I'm worried the Garden State will no longer be a Garden State when I'm gone. So thank you for letting me share.
Hello, my name is Chenoa Myers, and my son, he goes to Riverside. My background is in education. My degree is in education as well. But I do qualify for affordable housing. However, I'm on the list and stuff. I don't even think that I would be able to get affordable housing, but there's such a lack of affordable housing that it's such a need that I don't think that we would even make it on any of the affordable housing units. I mean, I could be wrong, but we are here in Princeton, but I grew up in Columbia, Maryland. So I think it's great what you guys are doing. And I think that Princeton has been here for so long, and I think it doesn't seem like you're just starting to do affordable housing, but like the community that I grew up in, before the community was even developed, that they actually had a plan for all of that. And I just wanted to kind of share that, because the things that you're trying to do now, Columbia has already succeeded at, Columbia, Maryland. So I think that if you're looking for a plan, I think it's important that when you are developing housing, that it does go along with the overall goals and values of the community. And that's what I've seen in Columbia, Maryland. We partly grew up affordable and partly not. So I saw both sides. When you go into Columbia, Maryland, you can't tell what is affordable and what isn't. And I think that, Princeton it reminds me of Columbia, but I do know that I have driven down some roads like Reading Circle and Clay Street. And I think that might be a fear for some of the residents, that these affordable units are going to be separate from the community or look separate from, bring the value down. Whether it's the value or not, I think that you look at the overall goals and the purpose of the community and the people, and Columbia looked at all of that. They also made sure that they had certain areas that was just designated for, parks and stuff like that. They looked at the overall vision to see how to grow the community to include everyone. And I mean, today, Columbia has maintained the top 4 or 5 places to live in the United States of America. And I don't know too many places that have accomplished what Columbia has accomplished over the last, 50 years. I think they started in the 60s, and you see the results of it. So I think if it's done right, which it seems like you guys are doing that, I think that if everyone works together, as far as the architects or whoever, and you make it in a way where it includes and it blends into the community, and it looks the same, just like Columbia has done. You can't tell what's low income. You can't tell what's middle. It all looks the same. The lawn is still cut. There's no trash anywhere. You know, they take care of the community, and they take care of their people, no matter what you make, no matter where you're coming in at. The library system is different library system. I mean, well, it's one library system, but it's different libraries. So I think when you're planning, you have to think about, we're growing. What are we going to need in the years to come? Whether it's more libraries, so it won't be so much pressure on just the one, or whether it is another school, or whether it is, transportation and, rerouting certain roads or building roads or sidewalks for people who need, who have wheelchairs or whatever, I'm not sure everyone who needs it, but I'm just saying, or people who ride bikes. But I just think that it's wonderful what you guys are doing. I think it needs to be more than I think you should shoot for. I don't know if people are into it, but I think you should shoot for more than what the goal is, because the community is going to grow. And as the community grows, if you take care of the community will take care of you. So, and then not only that, the community, they will grow up, the kids will grow up and go out into the world and be productive. So that is what you're growing. It's not just we're making it to accomplish a need and a goal for what is right now. You have to think for years to come, for when we're not even here. So I just wanted to speak on that, and just to really have you look into James Rouse and how he made a plan for Columbia, Maryland, and how successful it is now. And it wasn't just for affordable housing. He was also in there for profit, but also to be a good steward of the land. So we are here to be good stewards of the land now. And then, we're going to pass it on. These are ideas and principles that you want to pass down so that generations to come can do the same. And it can keep on preserving where you're at. In what you're doing for Princeton. Princeton's beautiful, and it reminds me of Howard County, but just like I said, when I looked at Reading Circle and Clay Street, I'm like, I don't think anybody would want to live there. So you don't want to, you want to keep that in mind when you're building affordable housing, that you want to build something that is good for the whole, So yeah, I think you're doing that though. So take care. Thank you.
All right, Adam, would you like to bring over those handful of folks that are on Zoom? They left. Okay. Council President Sachs, would you like to respond to what we heard before?
Yeah, I just want to wrap up. It's amazing. People still here. I just want to, David, I just want to address your comments because the constraints that I was describing are constraints that exist in any development project. There are costs involved. The difference between redevelopment and a straight development zoning process is that basically the developer creates his model, his pro forma, his plans in a vacuum. We don't see it. It comes before the planning board. You as the public have one night to comment, and then it's a done deal. With redevelopment, there is the ability for you to leverage the power of your elected representatives to hold the redeveloper or to specific benchmarks we as the community want and that you as the neighborhood want. There is no other land use process that I know of that gives that ability to extract those sorts of benefits and concessions. That said, we live, I was encouraging us all to be realistic, and the things that we would all like to have, quality of design, of materials, of stormwater mitigation, traffic calming, they cost money. We can't realistically ask the redeveloper to donate those to the community. It is a for-profit developer. So that is where the density comes in. So if the neighborhood's starting position is we want the absolute minimum lowest possible density, it makes it very difficult to ask the developer to contribute to build, to construct, to do the development in the way that would benefit all of us. And the same point, Steve's point about what is the connection between density and affordable housing. If you have the minimum density, then we're looking at 1, 2, 3 affordable units. So in terms of HBC review, just want to point out that the neighborhood strongly resisted historic preservation status a number of years ago. It was 10, 15 years ago. The town worked really hard to try to get this neighborhood to enact historic preservation protections, and they resisted it. That said, I'm not sure what kind of, this is not a designated historic site. It's not even in a suggested site. So Elizabeth Kim is here. Whatever would or wouldn't be the review would be the same as under. Okay, so, but anyway, the redevelopment framework doesn't in any way change that. The redevelopment is basically a huge amount of work on the front end to put in a very specific plan to get the results that we want. And then there's the whole regular site plan process, planning board, all of the committees of the planning board, the environmental commission, shade tree commission, the engineers, traffic report, that whole robust process then starts. So this is actually a whole layer of work on the site, which is to create the zoning on the site, and that's what the council is tasked with. So I just wanted to reassure you on that point. And in terms of the traffic, I think there was a lot of discussion in round one about how there are all sorts of very aesthetically unappealing projects that could be put on the site under the existing zoning with educational uses that would have resulted in much worse traffic impacts to the neighborhood. I will say that it's painful for me to hear that there may be a situation in which the seminary grad students are going to continue to have to drive in and out of Princeton, where there would have been this opportunity for them to just have a walkable lifestyle. But I think we all have to stop thinking about the past and what could have been. So in terms of the other thing in costs, I think we all want high quality design, architecture, materials. We want a beautiful development, and that costs money. And density is one way, is really the only way to unless we're asking the redeveloper to donate, which I'm not sure that we're going to be able to do that. So I guess that's what I'm saying, like the density, as challenging as it is, if you start at a minimum point of density, it basically cuts everything off that's possible just because of the economic realities, which would be the case in any site. But this, in the redevelopment process, we have the chance to actually as your representatives on council, interact with the redeveloper and look at their pro forma and their financial projections and verify whether or not what they are purporting is the cost to do the things that we're asking is legitimate. So that it just gives us a great deal of much more control into, I'm sorry, forgot your name, but to this gentleman's point, I think now is the time for us to actively engage in those discussions. I just, if you will indulge me one moment there, I was looking back and I found this op-ed or LTE, that a letter to the town topics that was written in the first time around, and it's a gentleman who lives on Edgehill, and he said, when I grew up in the country outside Princeton, some of my best moments were bringing my bicycle to town, visiting friends whose families lived in Frog Hollow, on Hodge Road and nearby streets. These were lively neighborhoods with kids on bicycles and regular games on the field at the corner of Hibben Road and Mercer. Over time, these streets have become an area, I would no longer call it a neighborhood, of wealthy, increasingly elderly people. It's unusual to see a child here. This was about the Seminary project, but he said, let's work together to create what could actually be a neighborhood. And I just want to say that I actually grew up just a few blocks from the Seminary site from age 8 until the end of high school. I really appreciate the beauty and uniqueness of this neighborhood. I remember when it was a neighborhood and we could bike around, and I remember playing games at the corner of Hibben, and I do think that we can achieve that type of beauty. There was an application that came to the planning board last week from the Hun School, which looked as if it might have been there for 200 years. I do think that there is architecture and design that can be put on this site that will make everyone proud to live near, and that will live up to the Gateway tradition. But it is going to take work we're all going to have to roll up our sleeves and make some compromises and make that happen. But I do believe it can happen. And I just want to end by saying that I also hope that we can keep that beautiful spot at the corner of Hibben, which has long been a place for neighborhood kids to play as a park, because I think that is essential for the area. So thank you, everybody, for coming.